All right, everybody. I'm Bobby Brill. I am the host of Creative Mind here at the Academy of Art University. And for this panel, we have Jordan McCracken-Foster, who is a concept artist and an illustrator. He's doing some teaching at artprof.org, and he is going to walk us through the idea of character building and character development and how you start that process out. So I'm going to hand it off to the artist and try and stay out of the way. Jordan, take it away.
All right, so hey everyone, I'm going to show you this character that I wanted to design for today's session. And the first thing I like to start off with whenever I get a prompt for a character or I have something in mind is I like to have a mood board or a reference board. And so what you're seeing here on my screen is a bunch of ideas that I've pulled from online sources, whether it's artwork, from movies, from fashion, whatever I think will help me to inspire this character. So, and I even have notes here. So I have portions that talk about, I like the hairstyle here. I like the, how he's pensive and serious, body shape, the printing on his clothes. So whatever reference I might need, and I will always use that as reference.
Jordan, I got a question for you. So when you do a mood board, how is this, are you getting this information from a client, or is this something that you do personally as the artist to get a start?
It's a mix. So if it's my own personal project, I would usually have a prompt of the character. Like I need to know certain things about them. Like, are they male or female? Are they an adult or a kid? Are they a warrior? Are they a bounty hunter? Are they a chef? All those different things really come into play. And so I need to have at least a basic understanding of who this character is. So when a client comes to me and they say, I have this idea for a kid who's really imaginative, I can get reference based off of that, and I'll build around that prompt.
And does the client sign off on this, or is this just a, hey, this is what we talked about, please stay within these parameters, or how does that work?
So the reference board is really just for me to get ideas and to get inspired. I actually tend to not show this to anybody.
Okay.
It's more for my own records, just to spark some ideas. And there are plenty of times where I deviate from the reference, and that's totally okay, because the whole point of it is just to get me to come up with an idea, come up with a concept.
Okay, got it.
And taking from real life and movies and all that stuff is really helpful to just get that process going.
Oh, cool. And before you get too deep into what you're doing, walk us through real quickly, what are you working in? What are some of the actual tools you're using? So if somebody wants to try and replicate this, or just to know what you're doing as an artist, what have we got up on the screen?
Sure. So I'm using Adobe Photoshop, and I'm using my Cintiq 21UX, and that's how I made this whole mood board. It's what I'm going to be drawing in. You can also do this type of thing on the iPad or almost any other digital drawing software. It's just what I tend to use personally.
But this is pretty much what you live in all day long as an artist?
Basically.
Okay. It's all Photoshop. So it's interesting because I know a lot of the people we've talked to, and when you meet a lot of digital artists, it's very much segmented into different software, but it seems that Photoshop is the way to go, not necessarily something like Corel or something like that. Photoshop is just the most popular, or?
Yeah, I think Photoshop is the most popular. Okay. It's funny because Photoshop is really originally meant to just edit photos, but I think people kind of made it into a drawing tool.
Okay, right.
But it's definitely industry standard. It's definitely used in every company I've ever heard of with that type of work. And as far as the other software, I assume people use them just fine, but I've never used a lot of them just because I've always had this. So I haven't experienced too much with that.
Okay, cool. Got it.
So after I created this mood board, what I did was I decided to create some thumbnails, and I wanted to have this character that was like a warrior. He's a warrior, and he's wearing some ceremonial garb for this this festival. And I just had that idea in mind. So I wanted to have that sense of strength, but also a sense of honor and regality. And so what I did is I drew this body first, because I have to place the clothes on the body, and therefore it's incredibly important that I get that right. If he's an entirely different shape, if he's shaped like Santa Claus, I ought to know that as a designer. If he's shaped, like a really skinny person, I need to know that because the clothes will fall differently on each person. And so I took my reference photos that we saw on here, and I put them all together before the stream, obviously. And I just said, okay, I like this shape, I like this shape, these types of clothing here. And I ended up liking the design for number 2. And so basically enlarged it and just plopped it on top of him. And so now I have a direction that I want to head in. And this doesn't have to be a final look. I can always change things about it, but this is a direction I feel comfortable with going, and I feel like it explains who this character is more than any of the other designs that I did.
I'm going to ask you a quick question again, because there's Photoshop and in layers. How much of your drawing and your organization comes thinking in layers? I mean, because normally if you're drawing on pencil and paper, that's it. Or if you're really old school, you've got flip up pages and tracing paper and things like that. But how much do you work in layers, and what's the benefit of that?
Yeah, I use layers all the time. If you were to see my other files, there's just groups and groups of layers, like 10 or 20 layers in a group. And the reason for that is because there are certain things, like let's say I have this body sketch, and right now this is pretty solid and I don't want this to change too much. And I'm afraid if I draw on top of it that I'm going to mess something up, or if I erase, then the whole body is just going to disappear. So that's where the benefit comes from drawing on a different layer for the clothing, like something like this, because if I decide to change something, like just as an example, if I say, no, I'm going to change that, the top of his chest, then I don't have to worry about the body underneath. I just have to worry about the clothing. And so it's incredibly useful. And I recommend that artists use the tool that's available to them, because a lot of times artists will, or new artists will have this apprehension of using it because they're like, oh, well, traditionally it's supposed to be one layer. And in reality, use the tool to your advantage. There's no rhyme or reason to say you can't use the layer when it's available. So, so yeah. And so what I usually do whenever I get to this point, I usually just lower the opacity on these layers so I can still see it, but it's not, punching me in the face. And I just start drawing on top of it. And I'm just going to start going with, it's probably not going to be super clean lines. I would probably ordinarily go back in and edit and make sure all the shapes are exactly the way that I want. But for now, this will give me a really strong read on what I want this character to be in the end. So you see me just figuring out the face. I tend to start with the face first because that's the thing that we connect to most often. Whenever you look at someone, you tend to look at their face. And unless there's something that's preventing that from happening, like them wearing a mask or something like that, I think it's always a good idea. And that's why I'm not like starting with the elbow or something like that.
Right, you get your character and your feeling and the soul of the character that way.
Right, exactly. It's just, I mean, all the emotion is hidden up here. And I feel like if you can capture them in the character in the face, then you are already at a good space. Doesn't always mean that they're wearing the right clothing or that you can't even change the design or, give them a beard or a piercing or something like that. But if you can just get that face down, it is always a big help.
And you started with this project directly in Photoshop? You didn't have an actual pen and paper or a pencil and paper sketch at all? You went straight in start designing in Photoshop?
Yes, I went straight in here with in Photoshop. And this is, I like Photoshop a lot because it's also a great tool just for sketching and getting ideas across. As you saw, that mood board that I did earlier was completely created in this software. And so I find it really, really helpful as someone who's trying to just start designing.
So for some of the older artists, I'm going to throw myself into that. I'm not that old, but I didn't use a Cintiq. I had to draw with pencil and paper. What are some of the tips or some of the tricks you've learned? Because obviously you had to do, no matter what, the foundations of drawing with pencil and paper, moving into a completely digital world and a digital pencil and tablet.
That's tough because honestly, it just comes from using it a lot. I actually took a course in my master's program that was specifically designed to get you drawing digitally a lot. Like we would do 8 to 10 hours of figure drawing a day. and or per class session, I would say.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and then the homework assignments would be similar, where we would have to draw like 50 head sketches or 20 figure drawings or whatever the case may be in Photoshop. And when you get that sort of pencil mileage under your belt, it's almost impossible to not grow from it.
Okay, so really it's not a hindrance. It's just okay, I've got to figure out how to get my mind wrapped around using something that I don't have to sharpen every 2 minutes.
Right. I mean, there's the most difficult part for a lot of people tends to be just learning where the things are in the program. Like, where's your brushes? How do you fill in paint? That type of thing. But other than that, a lot of it is just simple getting used to drawing on a screen, which can be challenging for some people, but it's one of those things that we kind of just got to get used to.
And then, of course, you're left-handed.
Oh yeah, I'm a lefty.
Oh man, oh, I'm left-handed too, and just being reminded, oh, you're never going to be a professional if you're left-handed.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
Oh yeah, that was, well, you're using a real pencil. They always like, yeah, as you keep going to the left, and right, you're just mushing together all of your artwork. Like, oh, you'll never be a professional now.
That's so funny. Yeah, well, honestly, the most difficult thing for me was just not having my teachers be annoyed at me because my setup was so weird. Because like this whole panel on the left with my layers and colors and stuff, that's
right.
Typically on the right side. And whenever I would be in school, my teachers would come over to my Cintiq and they would get so irritated because I had it set up the wrong way. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, I hate coming over here because you always got it set up wrong. And I was like, what do you want from me? Like, do you want to teach me how to draw with my right hand? I think that would be worse for all of you, And then they would stop.
And so for a lot of people who are looking to do this, just basic, we're talking about just basic drawing here as opposed to the actual character, which we'll get back to, but it's definitely a pen and a tablet. Are you able to do this with the mouse, or is it really about learning to use that?
There's always going to be someone who can say that they can do this with the mouse, but I feel like that would be way slower and not very intuitive. I remember one time I made artwork on a trackpad and it took me like 4 days to do like one image, and it wasn't even that good. It didn't have any atmospheric perspective or anything. It was like this graphic poster that I was making, and it didn't even come out that great. So yeah, I think anything that resembles a pencil and pen is the best way to go, because it's much more intuitive that way. Like, you've been training to draw for all this time. It would make a lot of sense to have a tool that kind of replicates that, which is why I think a lot of people like the iPad as well, because it's portable and you can use a lot of the same stuff.
Right. That the hot software is Procreate or something like that. And I guess Adobe's got something else they've got that rivals that as well.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us, now you've done his face, the basic structure of his face, and now you're moving on to his outer robes and some of his different pieces. Explain what steps you're going to now. What's the thinking behind that?
Right. So typically for me, at this stage in my artistic career, I need quite a few like sketches. So you notice I started off with this, but this is pretty rough, and there's not a whole lot of description going on here. So what I'm doing in this stage is I'm going back in and I'm just tightening up those lines a little bit more, because ambiguity is not my friend when it comes to designing. I don't think it's anyone's friend really. And so now I'm just thinking about defining these shapes a little bit more, and saying, okay, what kind of design does this have? And thinking about big, medium, and small shapes, trying to make them look interesting. Because I have the basics down. I have the main structure of what I want, but now it's just about figuring out a lot of those details. And quite honestly, that is what I find most of the character design work is done. It's more about getting the idea right, and then the actual technical skill and of putting it all together. It's not as work. I don't want to say it's not as work as intensive, because it does take a long time, but it's not as much thinking. The thinking stage needs to come early on, and that's where a lot of these quicker drawings come from. And it's easier to design when you get all those out as quickly as possible. rather than just waiting for a long time.
So you won't take this black pen layer, we'll call it, to full render. This is still just a refinement version.
Yeah, so that's typically how I work. Some people are able to go straight in. I am not there yet. I'll admit that freely. One day, maybe a couple of years, I will. But I'm still trying to figure out, a little bit more about this character. And so if I were to go back to my mood board, there's a couple of things that I never defined in the sketches. Like there are some patterns here that I think are really, really cool. Like down in her legs and on the cape here, and I kind of want to steal this robe a little bit, but there's a lot going on here, and so I need to start really going in and defining that out a bit now. And I'm not so worried about getting a pretty drawing as much as a good design. The pretty drawings can always come later, and everyone likes that, but that's not where the real work is, in my opinion.
Right, because I mean that's one question and something that came up in a lot of the other panels is, as a concept artist, you may make something to this level and stop, correct? And then it goes to somebody else who may even take it further, correct?
Exactly. So you're always typically working in a team. And when you're working in that team, you don't always get to finish what you started. And that's just the way it works. So, I mean, a lot of my time I spent finishing my own assignments because they were for school or something like that, or we would call dibs on a group project. But typically in a larger work environment, those sort of things don't always happen.
Right, because if you're doing this and it's for a 3D render, that's where the math guys get in. That's that next layer of programming where they're going to be putting it into 3D and animating it and then rigging it and all that other fun stuff. Exactly. Where they're coming off of your concept.
Exactly. So yeah, that's primarily what I'm doing. It's just figuring it out so I can pass it on to the next person in the pipeline. And if the sketch is approved and if I'm lucky, then maybe they'll say, hey, Jordan, can you keep working on this? And sure, no problem. Because I actually do enjoy that final step of getting that rendering done, but it doesn't always happen that way. So I forgot to mention, sometimes I'm looking off the screen or I stop drawing for a second. I have other reference on my monitor, my mood board's up there, and a couple of other things that are helping me. I'm always looking back on references and trying to figure out what it is that I want to take from each tool. And I tend to go back and forth also. Like you saw me go work on the body for all this time, and now I'm going back up to the face and all this stuff. So it really depends on how I feel. And then I just changed the hair because something about it wasn't as appealing to me yet. So I'm trying to figure that out. And, it's constantly just going back and forth.
When you're drawing something like this in a professional situation, do you give yourself a time limit? Like back in school, it was like, here, you got a 10-minute render, a 20-minute render, a 2-minute render. Is there a time frame you're giving yourself, or where do you look at the piece and go, okay, I can move to the next point?
I get a lot of it kind of depends on how far I've gotten. It's hard to say. I definitely try to work quickly, but there are times where things are a little bit more difficult to figure out. And then there are times where I'm also just not as much in a rush. So if I'm in a rush, then I'll just do what I can. But otherwise, I like to just try and figure it all the way out and take as much time as I need. Because for me, I think the goal is just to make a good design and tell a good story. And forcing that doesn't always happen, for me at least. I'm definitely going to try and learn how to do that a little bit more, but it doesn't always happen right away.
Well, but that's an interesting point you made, that you're telling a story. You're not necessarily just, okay, here's a cool guy. Mm-hmm. You're telling a story, so that mood board that you make has all of that emotion and feeling and ideas and things like that. What story were you telling, or that you told yourself, when you were putting this mood board and this character together?
Oh, okay. So I was thinking of, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I was thinking of this warrior character. And since we're doing this for Afro Comic Con, I just think that would be so cool to have a character who's just that strong warrior, and thinking about stuff like Black Panther and rest in peace Chadwick, and all these different things. So I wanted to have that character, but I also didn't want him to just look like a pure fighter. I wanted him to look strong and bold and confident, but I definitely didn't want him to uh, just be that. So I wanted to add some sort of, not quite a royal feeling to him, but like he's an incredibly important figure in the world.
And how much does that backstory play when you're drawing? Does it change on you as you're going through your character development, or is it, this is what I'm going to stick to and this is how I'm going to finish it?
That's the whole fun of storytelling, is that things do change. There are times where I add an element and I go like, well, why did I add that? And I think of a story, or vice versa. Typically, it's probably better to come up with the idea and the reason first, so you don't have to backtrack too much. But there are times where I'm like, oh, this looks so cool, and what if I add this element to him, and blah blah blah. And so I always find that incredibly exciting and exhilarating when that happens, because if you hear any writer tell it, they will say their story changes all the time. Like I just recently finished Breaking Bad for the very first time, and one of the things that the writers were saying was that they were thinking about killing off a certain character, but they ended up liking him so much that they carried him out through the entire series. And
Right.
that's one of those changes that you can't always predict when you are starting out something. So
Yeah, it's got to be tough when you're drawing something and it's like, I really love what I've done here. I cannot get rid of it. It's got to stay, and it's got to
right.
retake over my design now.
Right. So it's definitely tough, but it's also very exciting. Um, and so just so I explain what I'm doing, why I put these little things here. I want to have a balance of big, medium, and small shapes. So one of the principles of character design, you want to have a mix of stuff. So you think, you know, you have a big, medium, and then a small. And having that variety is really, really helpful, as well as shapes. So like I have this big square here. Oftentimes squares can represent stability or strength. Like you think of characters like Mr. Incredible, or any superhero, Captain America. Buildings are primarily squares. So I'm trying to think of those things and the big, medium, small shapes all together, and just saying, okay, where can I put something, some sort of extra design element to make him a little bit more interesting? And since I'm going with something that looks kind of regal, I'm adding a little uh, uh, design flair on here. I gave him some beads, um, maybe a little bit of a trim on the bottom of the cloak here.
And since we're still in the preliminary stage of this drawing, can you tell me what were some of the classes that you took in your education that really have helped you to get to this point? Were there any one particular class or a few that really allowed you to take your work as an artist to this level?
There's one class in particular. It was called Stylized Character Design that I really, really liked. And that one, most of the class was, look at the style of this particular artist and study them. So we did Craig McCracken, we did Steven Silver, Phil Barassa, all these guys that I look up to personally, and we would mimic their art and get as close to the original as possible. And what it did is it taught me how these different artists are solving these problems. Because when you think about character design or any other design, really, you have to be a visual problem solver. That's what one of my teachers likes to say a lot, and it's true. And you have to, and so that class really taught me how to do that. And then I also had to work on my characters for my thesis project, alongside it. And so I was able to apply those things to my characters as I was working on them.
Well, that's interesting that you said that the thing that you learned the most from was drawing in the style of other people,
Hmm.
which does make sense because if you are eventually going to be working with a team, it's not, you know, Jordan's design, it's the design of the person I did with, and I've got to keep it in style. There is that Disney method or that animation method where it's not one guy drawing Mickey Mouse for the rest of his life. It's
Right.
everybody's drawing Mickey Mouse, and you've got to draw Mickey Mouse the right way.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the tricky part. And the cool thing about Mickey Mouse is there's been so many interpretations of him over the last almost 100 years that, you know, the same basics stay the same. Like he, you know, his ears, you pretty much can't get rid of those ears, or even his outfit, but there's still different design aspects to him where he still can be fresh even after almost a century of experiencing the little mouse. So, and that goes for a lot of these other really cool characters that we enjoy. Bugs Bunnies look different. You know, some characters don't even have a specific design. Cinderella, Snow White. It's really amazing how far you can take it as an artist or as a group of artists.
Well, and also there's that big difference between fine art rendering, which I'm sure you did,
Mhm.
and that fine art figure drawing where it's all about the tonality, the light and shadow, the perfection of that human body, and then the illustrative version where it's what we're looking at now. It's real, but it's not. You know it's a comic book, but it's still all the anatomy is there and rich detail. Um, what are some classes or what is some education people can think of should be focusing on when they want to start drawing a character?
Can you rephrase the question? What do you mean with education? People should think.
What would be some classes or what would be what should they start to draw and how should they start thinking about drawing
Oh, I
when
see.
they want to start drawing characters? Because your character, this isn't a fine artist would look at this and go, this is an illustration. An
Mhm.
illustrator will look at this and go, no, this is a character.
Right.
And that difference between the two, what are some things that some classes that you took or just some things that people should think about if they want to start really developing their character design?
I see. So I think one of the biggest things that a lot of young inexperienced artists, I myself was among this group, so you know, uh, I think just learning how to draw and design is big. Learning how to draw the figure, that's incredibly important, especially if you want to do something like character design. And you can't really break away from that. If you have really bad anatomy, people are going to notice. And so I think that, you know, that's a huge step, being able to draw any object that comes your way. So if you have a prompt for a character and they have a robotic arm, can you draw something that looks robotic? Or if you know, if you need to draw a character in a car, or wherever the case may be. So I think that all is incredibly important. I also think that alongside that, just understanding the principles of design. So, you know, like I mentioned, big, medium, small. There's shape design. There's the quality of line. Uh, there's an infinite number of things that are basic principles. You know, value, colors, and as an artist or as a student continues to learn those, they're all going to start to click. I notice for a lot of people, it takes a while to understand all those things and how they connect. But there's always that one assignment, there's always that one project that a student will get, and it just clicks for them, and they'll start to fully grasp all those principles and understand, oh, that's what the teacher meant, and this is how it applies to my work as an artist.
Okay, so catch us up a little bit. We've gone from uh, we got a new layer here. So this
Yes.
is this purple layer. So what was the step? So you finished your black line drawing on top of the red, and
Mhm.
now we're into a purple. You're drawing on top of that purple layer. So what was that change? What have you updated?
Right. So what I did was I just took this drawing that was really, you know, it told my story, but it was still very, very loose. And I think there were a lot of details missing. And so I said, okay, now that I've taken this, how can I take it a little bit further? And so I drew on top of that, and I came up with this, which refines just a little bit more. And I think it's more clear. Doesn't necessarily mean the design is done per se. There's still some things I can add throughout the process. Like maybe I want to add a particular shape, on the part of his waist or on his leg or something like that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can almost hear some of these accessories maybe jingling and jangling, and you can feel the flow starting to come from his cape. I mean, the refinement is definitely greatly improved in just a few simple is an understatement, a few key strokes that you've made.
Right. And so now that I understand that, and now that I've gotten to this place, I can take it and do just something a little bit cleaner. And ordinarily, if I'm, really trying to get something super polished, it might take me a couple of these. For the purposes of this demo, probably, I probably won't get that far, but I'm gonna see if I can also include a little bit of color if I move fast enough. But yeah, so it's a lot of thinking and trying to just figure out exactly who this character is. And going back to the whole story element, that is key. There's a phrase that my friend, who's also was a classmate with me, she always would go like, "Story is king." Remember that, Jordan? Story is king. And as I started designing, I started understanding what that meant a lot more, because that has to drive the entire design. I can't figure out who this character is without a strong story. And so I'm constantly thinking, okay, would this character wear that in this situation? Does this make sense? Could he move his arms? Could he and I had to think of all these questions and treat him as if he's a real person, as if I actually know him, because that's sort of the intimacy level that's required for a character design. You have to know your character inside and out. Even if you don't agree with the character, you have to be able to understand them. Like going back to Breaking Bad, a lot of people don't like the protagonist, Walter White, because he makes a lot of really messed up decisions. But I think a lot of people can still relate to him and understand some of the reasons why he does the things that he does. So it's not even about, having agreements or disagreements on a moral level. It's just more about on a human level. Do you relate? Can you understand?
Yeah, there's something to be said though for being a bad guy or drawing a bad guy seems to be the most fun. You get there's really no rules.
Right. They always have the coolest costumes. Like Darth Vader, he looks awesome no matter what you do.
Right, exactly.
He looks really cool.
Bad guys, anti-heroes, zombies.
Right.
It's like, do whatever you want, man. You're
Yeah, and I find something about them feels a little easier to me personally, even though I wouldn't consider myself a villainous type of person. There's something about them that is really intriguing to me. And even when I was in my thesis class or that character design class, I was working on my thesis, I did my villains first. And I still don't have a full reason why, but I think it was just because they looked really cool in my mind. And I was like, man, if I can just get them down, then I could, really figure out how to contrast my main character with that. Because like you said, with villains, there's almost no limits. You can give them wild hairstyles, you can give them big old scars if you want to, you can give them really tattered clothing, or pretty much anything that comes to your mind, and it will almost always work as long as it fits with the world and the story.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of screenwriters write from the ending backwards. It's like, I know the ending, I know what's going to happen, I know who dies, here's my big dramatic death. Then I got to go back in and figure it out. But the dramatic death, the evil bad guys, that's where we're starting from.
Right. It's a lot of fun. I think it's incredibly enjoyable. So this character in particular I wouldn't consider him a villain at all. But
this is certainly a hero.
Yeah, I definitely, maybe I should have done a villain for this, but I don't know. I was feeling kind of heroic.
He could have his anti-hero moments, I think.
Yeah, there we go.
He needs his moment of truth to really become the hero.
Right. So there's always a lot you can really do.
A question on this type of drawing as well. The clothing is a character in and of its own. How, what are some tips, or what is it that you do to really understand clothing and how it moves? Is there anything special you do to really be good at drawing clothing?
I think first off, taking a clothes figure drawing class will definitely help. Understanding the basics like wraparound, different types of fabric, how they work. And I'm not saying I'm an expert by any means, but I think that those will always help a person to develop as an artist. Once they understand those things, like I notice art is a lot about learn the basics first, and then you can really develop some wild stuff. Like even Darth Vader, right? Like he has a cloak and or a cape, whatever you want to call it, and that follows certain rules. You know, that cape is only going to flow a certain way. And there's certain things it definitely won't do. There's a certain way fabric tears. There's a certain way that all these things have to come into play. So you have to understand those basics and how they work, I think.
Right, you mentioned earlier, can this character actually lift his arms in what I'm creating? Is there reality to what you're drawing?
Right. So like with this character, I wanted to add like a little bit of a slit here, and I might change this later on. I could totally see myself going back to this and looking at it and saying, oh, I think I could change this and that. But I thinking, okay, well, he's going to have a slit here in order to move his arms. Otherwise, he's just going to be kind of stuck for a long time. So yeah, it's incredibly important to think about those things as I'm designing. Then going to the pants. And again, this is, the other thing about doing concept art, I heard this from my teachers a lot, is it's not always about doing pretty art. A lot of it is very rough. Like I actually have, I have several art books. One of them that I think is most prominent is the Black Panther art book from the Marvel Studios film. And a lot of their art, it looks incredibly rushed. And some people might not even like it because it doesn't look like something you would see on a movie poster or something that you would really use to advertise the film. But because it does its job, it's fine. You get the idea of what this character is supposed to be like. You understand, how the clothing is and who they're supposed to be, what they represent, and that does its job right there.
Well, it's also interesting watching you as you draw these things. Like first you had that, oh, I'll curve it. Nah, I'll keep it straight. Mm-hmm. Just kind of changing as you go. What are you thinking as you're adding these more fine-tuned elements?
Some of it is just taste, or maybe it's just not expressing exactly the feeling that I want. So like these, I just imagine them being little tassels, and so they're not going to draw a whole lot of attention, but they definitely, I think, add to the feeling of that sort of regality and sense of importance that I was going for. There's a lot of the decisions are kind of just on the fly too. Like, sometimes I don't want to say I'm being temperamental with it, but sometimes I'm just like, no, that doesn't work. And I just have to adjust constantly. Like this right here I don't like the way that connects. So I might have to change that up a little bit and just figure it out. It's like a big, I don't want to say it's a guessing game sometimes, but it's just a lot of, does this work? No. Does this work? Yes. And and just moving forward from there. And then constantly looking at my mood board and making sure I'm not getting too far off the reference that I'm using, because I still want to get that feeling of, what the mood board represented with, the African inspired clothing and the type of face that I want. It's all incredibly important to me.
So are there any books or any other things that you think people should be, gathering up or collecting as they are building a career in character design or in illustration?
Yeah, so actually I collect art books. That is my thing. That I I was over at my mom's house. I was visiting her, and I have a ton of boxes left over there because I couldn't take them all with me, and half of them are just boxes of art books. And I'm like, if worst comes to worst, all my other stuff can kind of just go, but I need my books. I need these. So I recommend getting things that are either inspiring to you or connected with the industry that you want to be a part of. So there's plenty of books on perspective. There's plenty of books on uh, learning how to draw the figure. My personal favorites are the art of books that movies and that come from movies and games and things like that. So right now, I actually on my desk have the Dragon Prince art book from the Netflix show. And that book has been inspiring. There's a couple of design elements that I grabbed from them and put in here. I was like, oh, this is really cool. There are times where I found PDFs online from books that are out of print, and so I think all of that is important. Just growing your visual library and your reference library is incredibly important as an artist, because you don't want to take inspiration from only one place. And I think it always helps to gather it from many different sources, which is why the mood board I had so many images on it. It's, if I just have one image, it would be hard for anyone to consider that a wide variety of inspiration.
Who are some of your favorite artists then?
Favorite artist, LaShawn Thomas. He is famous for working on the Boondocks, first 2 seasons, and then he has his own show called Cannon Busters on Netflix. I really like Ryan Meinerding, who's the head of visual development at Marvel Studios. Let's see, Ryan Benjamin's a favorite. John Lamb. There's a lot.
Yeah, I know that was a loaded question.
Yeah, Nicholas Cole. He's a great artist. He's actually a friend of mine, but I met him before I realized how good at art he was, and I always think it's really cool. I'm like, man, I can get some one-on-one tips, because it wasn't like I started off as some sort of fanboy. We were just actually cool. And then I was like, dude, your work is sick. Like, can you teach me this stuff? Like, one time I remember doing him a favor. I helped table for him at a convention while he had to go to a wedding. And he's like, how can I pay you back? I was like, man, you can give me some character design lessons. That was really cool. Yeah, I think those are my top. There are several others, and if I were to go through my Instagram, I could name even more, but those are the ones that come to mind at the top of my head.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned guys that you're actually contemporaries with and guys that you can see face to face. How important is not only working with other people, but meeting other artists to developing your craft?
I think I look at art as a community. As someone who, so there are a lot of people I know and have heard stories from that don't grow up in an artistic community, or it's not supported maybe by their family or their friends. And it's incredibly challenging for them a lot of times because they don't know anything else. They don't have artistic friends or anyone who thinks like them. And so one of the best things about going to art school for me was finding a group of people who I could actually relate to. And so I got my bachelor's and my master's degrees in art schools, and I absolutely love them because now I have former classmates who are now colleagues and coworkers who understand me, and a lot of my friends understand that artistic world, and it's great. So I think anyone trying to find that community or is considering it should really jump on it, because it's one of the best things that I think an artist could possibly do.
And where are you at now in the stage of drawing? What are you thinking here at this point?
Right now, I'm just kind of filling out the details. I would say I'm.
Wow, what a difference! I mean, let's people hold that up for us to see. Just that single line drawing, just that it's now looks like a cell ready for paint. I mean, it's so much closer to that finished view. Can you cycle through those layers for us, just so we can kind of see from your initial human sketch?
Yeah, so we have the body sketch here, and then we have the clothes on top. And let's see. Then we have this one, which is the rough, and then the version that's a little cleaner. There's a couple things that still need to be added.
Sure.
You know, like the beads on the wrist, some of the design on the shoes and things like that. But I think it's clean enough where I could do like a quick paint over it for color and
But explain this process, because this is fascinating in that you've gone from something that was very thick lined, very sketchy, very almost voluminous in its line work, and now you're getting down to almost geometric and very clean, narrow, decided lines. What is the reasoning behind that progression? What are you getting to?
So I like starting with thicker lines because it forces me to consider shape more. And in the beginning, that's really important as you're trying to figure out your design, because as I mentioned, that's one of the fundamentals of design, the shape, line, value, things like that. And so as I refine and make these little decisions more and more, it ends up helping me to see if those things are reading and if those things are working. And once I do that, then I can just nail it down and do like my final cleanup stuff. So, and I can do like a lot more tweaking this way. And so if I have to move the eyebrow down or the eye to the side or make it smaller or bigger, things like that, it starts to make a lot more sense to me.
It's always the eyes, man. Those are the hardest things ever.
Oh yeah. Those eyes are probably gonna be messed up for the rest of the video. I probably won't be happy with it because it's one of those things. They say, you know, the eyes are the window to the soul, and I would think that's true. And there's one character I did for my thesis, and I redrew his eyes like 7 times or 8 times, maybe even more than that, just because I didn't feel like they were right. And I was like, oh, they're wonky, they're this or that. So eyes are particularly challenging.
I do. A lot of people, if you're just learning how to do art, there is a point in time where you just sit down and have to draw thousands of eyes because there's so much. It seems like there's more math and more rules to drawing the eye than anywhere else. It's like, no, the pupil is not a full circle. It's a half circle, but it's not really a half circle. It's a crescent shape, but it's not really a crescent shape. And like you said, there's so much into it that drawing the eye is like, oh man, can I just give him a helmet?
you know, yeah, you're right. It's incredibly challenging because, you know, again, that's one of the reasons I initially started with the face, because that's where you're going to connect with the character. You know, there are times where I can almost look past a character who has very strange shoes or something like that, or maybe there's something that's backwards in a turnaround. But if I can't get attached to their face and who they are, then that's going to be tough for me. That's going to be a serious challenge, and it makes it harder for me to believe. So now it is something I just like to do in my process, just filling in like things like the beard or the eyebrows, because it helps me to get a sense of how it just helps me, because recognizing that the eyebrows are just a line, it actually kind of throws me off a little bit, and I get distracted. So
do you go deep into this, into adding texture, or is that something that is further in the process that you are not going to focus on at the beginning?
Texture is one of those detail things. So at the beginning of a design, I think it's most important to just worry about line, shape, color, value, those basic things, proportions.
Your basic shading.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And then later on, I can worry about whether or not the gold looks like gold and stuff like that. Because that's more of a detail. As a matter of fact, if I were to just color this flat, I would just kind of have a little yellow, put a shine on it, and just call it for, you know, the time being, especially if I'm pressed for time. So let's see here. Trying to design. So the issue I'm having with this shirt right now is I want to have this kind of point us here, but I also don't want it to make a tangent with any of these lines. So maybe I'm not sure if I want to get rid of it, or maybe if I'll just make a circle. Maybe that'll do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's little
No,
stuff
no
like that.
pressure making a circle in front of everybody.
Oh yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, this is definitely where working digitally can save you. It's like it's close enough to be a circle, and now I'm just going to hit that transform tool, grab
Right.
some corners, make it a circle. I'm just getting the
Exactly.
idea across. Stop yelling at me.
Oh no, exactly. That's always really nice, and especially when I'm unsure of how something's going to turn out, that's when I'll really make a new layer. So right now, because this is still so loose, I'm not super worried. But if this were like one of those super clean sketches, like I'll show you one right here. This is one of my cleaner character designs, and I had to do things on different layers. Like I was unsure if the gloves would fit properly or this necklace that he's wearing. And so I would just put new layers, and then after a while I would combine them and go like, okay, now I feel safe. So now I can merge them. Okay. This guy's almost done with the lines, and then just add something like this maybe. And shoes. All right, so let's see. All right.
Well, then that's a pretty intense version from your earlier iterations. That it's I hope people are seeing that how it's going from a wash of everything to very detailed, because I think that's one of the things you always hear from instructors and when you're in art school is it's refine, 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 and refine often means taking away a lot of things and getting the story across, which you've done here, which is interesting. It's really amazing how we saw something that was that thick line sketch that was, oh, I get what this is and I see all this detail. Now you've taken away so much detail. It actually has more power in this clean, refined character.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just the vision finally coming, finally being utilized. It's you're finally seeing what was in my head. And though obviously there can be tweaks, if it's for a particular client, they might say, oh, I think we should add this or get rid of this or whatever it is. But at least my vision is being made clear. The way I'm seeing this character is more refined than it was at any of these drawings here. And though there are similarities, and you know, there's still a lot that I think that's new that adds to this character. And so yeah, I think that's pretty okay. I could add maybe some more wrinkles here, but yeah. All right, so now that I
Yeah,
have
this is great. This is, I mean, this is it's really a totally different drawing than what you originally did. If you want to cycle through those layers again, so we can see it, because
you know what
it's great.
you know what I'll do? I'll put them side by side so we can just
There we go.
go like that. So let's see. Move.
Because I think that's one of those things that when if somebody starts to take an art class, whether it's a weekend class, a 1-day class, or goes into art school, it's really about refinement, and that's confusing the first time you hear it, where you want to refine what you've done, because a lot of times I'm correct me if I'm wrong. You went through this. I remember going through. It's like, no, I'm doing very sketchy work, and I'm using the pencil and the feel, and you need to see it. And what you're showing us is, yeah, that's where you start. Now the work begins.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's a process that takes a while. You don't really always get the quickest rewards sometimes. I mean, concept art is supposed to be quick, but in the context of things, I don't know if it really is. Like you have to work quick, but the figuring out the final decision doesn't always come that way. And so you would have to be very, very patient. Um,
But no, this is fascinating, because it's interesting seeing your human sculpture with all of the anatomy there, and really I don't want to say lost, but it's not clearly visible in its design. However, the clothing, like you said, would not drape the way it would without that anatomy there, without that understanding of flow. and where you have his power and all of his individuality and feeling definitely shows in the progressions you've got. Can you walk us through some of your choices and some of your thinking from going from left to right?
Sure. So, when I first showed everyone, I said that the body frame is incredibly important to understand how the clothing would wrap over the figure. Like if you had a belly like this, and it's like a beer gut, then I would have to change all those things here and reflect that in the design. So that was the first step, just figuring out how is he built, and here I kept very, very similar. There are a couple things I changed. Right, for example, let me pick maybe a bright green. There's like these, not quite, I guess a collar that you could say that I left out here. I just felt like it was a little much. And if I can always decide to add it back depending on how I feel, but I something about just the round shape I thought was more appealing. And then I took this out, this little triangle shape here, because I felt it was starting to get a little too busy. Because there's already a lot of shapes going on. And I feel like if I did something like this, you would lose the focus. Because one of the things that I want to be key is this little necklace that he's wearing. That's something that's incredibly important to his culture and who he is as a character. So I tried to emphasize that by having things that would point to it. And rather than having this big triangle shape like this and then having this point here, I wanted it to be more direct. So now I have these connecting, this connecting, and then with the circle, I think it probably, this is something I'm still analyzing, but I think it actually makes it a little bit more central that this is what I want you to look at.
For sure, your lines of perspective are definitely hitting on to that necklace, as opposed to here's a bunch of very geometrical armor shapes.
Right.
You definitely softened him into somebody who has a deeper story behind him.
Right. And and now I'm at a stage with this where I could either start coloring or I could just start finding ways to put in little details. So if I wanted to add something to the shoulder armor, like I could put something here, or I put these little trims on the bottom of the cloak, and I could make more intricate design on the, I don't even know what I would call this, the belt waist flap thing. And all the way around, I just think that these types of decisions I've been making the entire stream, and it's getting much closer to what I had envisioned. So now I'm at a space where I can do some rough color if I wanted to. So let's see, do we still have time for that, or?
Oh yeah, keep going. No real hardcore time on.
Okay, cool. So have the color here, and then I'll just do something really rough. Typically what I like to do is I will do super rough colors and not even care if I'm coloring in the lines or not. So let's start with his skin tone. See, maybe something a little more red. So actually, I'm gonna change my brush here. So the reason.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
Let me ask you about that, because we're talking about skin tone, and skin tone really has a lot of variations to it. It's one of the harder things to color. Mm-hmm. What are some tricks for dealing with skin tone across cultures and ideas? I mean, a green goblin can be anything you want when you're dealing with somebody that's human. Mm-hmm. Any tips or any tricks you've got for working with skin tone to convey the character better?
I think a lot of it is actually done earlier, more at the stage of the writing, because there's a certain way I would design the face if it's from someone from a different culture. So the way that I learned this is, if you have a character who's Asian or Black, you want to be able to find a way to show that with just your lines, and then you could take that and I don't want to say make up whatever you want, because you could clearly have features like him and give him blue skin if I felt like it.
Sure, right.
So sometimes you could just color pick. For this character, I'm actually referencing another character that I already did. This one that I drew earlier. Let's see. In my mind, these two are in the same world, and
Okay.
and that's him with some colors. So I actually could just color pick that and put that on my new character here. So yeah, but as far as color goes, it really just depends on the world you're designing. One thing I definitely like though is when people change the type of saturation in the colors or in the skin tone, because there are some people who are more healthy who have more saturation, and you could, if you want to do someone who looks more sickly and like they're dying, you could desaturate it. You could give someone a slightly bluish skin tone or slightly greenish, and it's just, there's so many things, just color in general does a lot for design. It's kind of hard to go into. Sometimes some people have a really hard time understanding how it works, but
yeah, that color theory class that people should take is very much an eye-opening experience. It doesn't matter if you're an illustrator, a photographer, or even just somebody remotely interested in understanding color theory is like mind-blowing.
it's essential. It's really essential. And uh, I I think that one way to really get that going strong is just study photos. And like an exercise we do in class, there's a class I took at the Academy of Art called Color and Light. And what we would do is we would look at photos of different environment situations. So whether it's raining or it's bright and sunny, it's nighttime, and we would study those, and we try and not color pick, but match the color as closely as possible to that image and then paint it. And by understanding the science behind why things are the way they are as well. And by doing that, it really helps build your understanding of how these things should look and feel. And that's essential. I don't think anyone should try and avoid doing that as they want to work in color. It's great.
Right? People aren't just white, yellow, black.
Right.
Skies are not just blue.
Mm-hmm.
It's a blue wash. It's fine. It's that color temperature affects so much of what we see.
Right. And then also just color is often relative. There was one class I took in my undergrad, and I remember we painted, it was traditional paint, and I did a whole wash of this lime green, almost like Nickelodeon slime color. And we painted this 18, I don't know if it was 18 by 24, but it was pretty big. And our teacher told us to put our hand over it and see how the color would react. And my skin tone is, medium brown. And because there's a bit of a reddish tone to my skin, and it was combined with the lime green, it was really popping. It almost hurt my eyes. And there was no glow or anything. It was just like that.
Right.
And, it was really fascinating to me. And ever since then, I've always just thought about, okay, how does this color relate to this other one? And so, yeah, I find that incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, that concept of reflective light, shadow, highlights. Even when you start learning about tertiary colors, it's like, no, green, pink, and orange really can go together. And you're like, I would never paint anything I own green,
Right.
pink, and orange,
Right.
until you look at it and go, yeah, that does kind of feel right. I get it.
Right. It's so fascinating how just color works, and then thinking about complementary colors and tertiary and it's primary color. It's just, there's so much science behind it that it can be overwhelming sometimes. Let's see. So
this, I'm going to ask you some questions on this, because as you're coloring, is coloring the right term, or do you say adding color? Because coloring makes it sound like my 3-year-old.
No, coloring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Adding your pigment.
Right. Yeah.
bringing your digital tonality in.
Right.
I never would have thought this color. Can you go and show us on your mood board what you were thinking of?
Yes. Let's see.
This is great, but looking at your mood board and looking at this, there is a difference. To some people may have had a totally different concept, but I do see the kind of that Ollie vibe you've got.
Yeah. So one of the things in the story that I have is that color plays a very important role, and I also wanted him to represent this leader. And in this world, I kind of envision this type of cape that someone poorly photoshopped Chadwick Boseman's head onto. But I just
Oh,
picture.
good. It wasn't you. Okay, good.
No, I didn't do that. I was like, what is this? Because you could totally see the rest of it. I was like, okay, all right. But I just imagine this, and there's something about this that just he takes up so much space to me in a good way. Like there's something about him that just feels so powerful. And so I wanted to combine that with the goal I was thinking of here. And to be honest, ordinarily I would probably do like 6 color versions or more.
Okay, got it.
There's and the cool thing is by doing it as quickly as I am, I'm not spending a whole lot of time worrying about filling in the lines and things like that. There's plenty of time to make adjustments and say, I don't like this yellow, I could change it. And because all I'm doing is just trying to understand it. I can always clean it up later. Clean up is the part that everyone sees, but I don't want to say it's probably the least essential out of everything when you really think about it. Because the whole point is just getting an idea across. So now I'm just doing this hair, and that color might not be the right one. Yeah. Since I did the drawing, I'm gonna just pick my own work.
No, but it's interesting as you're changing colors, you can definitely see how color changes age and feeling in this character. When you had that lighter color, it looked younger. Now you're going for that grayer tone. It's like, oh, this guy's older. This guy's wiser. This guy's seen some things.
Right. So yeah, I have a lot of fun with this stage because there's so many possibilities, and I think that this is an incredibly important stage because the way you feel about a certain character, how you associate them, can really just be seen by the clothing that they wear. And if I can get close to that, then I feel, or if I can nail that, I feel like I've done a big portion of my job, because color is incredibly challenging, and being able to combine that with story and the world that they live in and association with characters, like there's a show that I like called Avatar: Last Airbender. There, in the first season, there are 3 main characters. 2 of them are primarily wearing blue, and the other is wearing red and yellow, and he stands out as the protagonist partially for that reason. There's other design reasons, but what I'm trying to do is I need to think about the other characters I have in this world, how they associate. Would this character, stand out in a lineup, or they fade away into the background? And so I have to consider all these things as I work. Let's see.
So since these guys are in the same world, what's the relationship between the two, or is that up to us to determine?
I want them to be father and son, actually. So my intention was that there would be some sort of cultural ceremony that the father's taking part of, and he's got to put on these, the special robe, if you will, this regalia, and his son is more like kind of like a break dancer almost, so they don't have to dress exactly the same, but this is specifically a very special what do you call it? A special scene that I had pictured them in. And so even if I don't, the other thing about story is, even if I don't say all that stuff verbally, I want the person to be able to feel that and understand that there's something about the way he looks that feels important. So it's all about the storytelling and how important that is.
And it's interesting as you look at the colors. I mean, you can see that, where even if you didn't say they're part of the same world, you can definitely go, okay, I can totally see these 2 characters inhabiting the same screen.
Right. And if I've achieved that, then I'm set, because a character design, they have to exist in a world. That's one pitfall that I fell into a lot, is I wouldn't really think about that, is you have to put them in the context of the world that they're living in. I know I've said it a few times already, but it's so important, and I can't say it enough, because it's not just this one character. They have to have family or friends or people they associate with. They have to, what's the culture? What's the time period? Is it a fictional world? Is it the real world? Is it, fantasy? Thinking about genre, all those things. So it's essential.
When we're talking about that, I got a question for you on that, because that has come up a lot in some of these panels, and that comes up a lot when you're talking with illustrators who are doing video game and concept art, and you start working on fantasy versus reality. And so a human or a humanoid character has a very specific anatomy, but what are some tips you can give or some pitfalls that you may have run into when you're taking this character and then he's a monster, or he's a dragon, or he changes into something that is fantastical and not in our real world? What are some things to think about when you're drawing a character that is not based in reality?
So when you're drawing a character based in reality, then you have to decide if that's going to be a very realistic world, or if it's going to be slightly stylized. Because you could argue that like the Marvel Cinematic Universe takes place in reality, but there's also a lot of elements that, like Groot, there's no way you're gonna walk around the park and find Groot hanging out, or Rocket, or whatever. So there's a big spectrum when it comes to total fantasy, things like Lord of the Rings or whatever. Then you have so much more play in the proportions and the hairstyles, the skin tone, like the film Avatar, James Cameron. Like I forget the name of the alien.
Naive or something.
Yeah.
Like the blue guys.
Yeah, the blue people, right? There was a lot about them that was completely just fun. Like they just had little markings on their skin. They were blue. They had these like almost cat-like noses, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I saw the movie. But yeah, you can have so much more play with those types of characters, and yeah, I have a lot of fun thinking of those types of things as I'm designing this world. But
so now you're throwing in shadow, correct?
Yeah. So I'm throwing in a little bit of shadow. I think this character is mostly done, at least for the concept, and I might, as I'm doing this, just say, oh, I think this color will look better here. But this is that stage that I do where I'm just like, all right, just fill in the shadow where I think it will go. And again, I'm not worried about being super clean right now. That's not the point of this. It's just to get the idea across. And then later on, I could, like I said, clean this up, refine it, make it look all professional and pretty and stuff. Or if we're in a studio environment, maybe they'll go like, all right, Jordan, work on this other character, and you over here clean this up and do a turnaround and all of that. So that's kind of the stage that this is at right now.
All right, explain that turnaround, because that's one that's always what's a turnaround?
Oh, okay. A turnaround is, so when you're working in a team environment, especially like animation or games or even film, everyone needs to be on the same page about stuff. And it's very hard to work in a team where not everyone's understanding everything. So what a turnaround does is it provides all the people on the team with the views of the design. So like, here, I'll show you the character that, the other character here, since I have one for him. Loading. But basically just shows them from all angles. And it's incredibly important because if you need to draw this character running from the back view, they're not going to be able to understand that just from looking at this, at what I've drawn here. There's probably a whole design and a whole aesthetic to it that they need to understand. So hopefully it loads in time. There we go. So this is one I did of that same character I showed you. And this is just to say, okay, this is what he looks like from the side. This is how his pants curl up. This is how they connect back here. This is what his hair looks like in the back. And so it just helps everyone get on the same page. And sometimes that's done by a different person than who did the actual front view design.
Okay. But that's where you had mentioned earlier about having the ability to draw in other people's styles, is
Mhm.
taking this, if you gave this to me to do the turnaround, it's like, okay, now I've got to really look at what you've done and go, okay, how am I going to make him look in the side, the 3/4, the
Right.
profile?
Right. And the other thing with with bigger companies and studios is you often have to do this for people who don't speak the same language as you. So like a lot of animated films or animated shows are done in Korea, and a lot of Americans don't speak Korean and a lot of Koreans don't speak English. And so you have to find a way to communicate that without losing time and forcing everyone to go like, no, this is supposed to go here, and there's just be a lot of issues with that. So so that I think would really help in, in a situation where you're either across the country or the world or whatever the case may be. And I put the shadows on. Okay, so there we go. I think, whoa, oops, forgot to put that layer. So
That is pretty awesome in that short amount of time. I mean, that gives us gives everyone something to strive for, and to think about what that question of how long does it take to make a character. Well, it could take this long. Granted, Jordan, you have had a lot more years of experience. But just as you're kind of finalizing this, before you went to art school, how early were you starting to draw?
So the way my mom tells the story is that apparently I used to trace the air with my finger before I could talk or do anything really, and she decided to put a crayon in my hand, and then it was curtains from that point on. That's how she tells it. Obviously, I don't remember that, but I always loved drawing as a kid. I always knew I wanted to be an artist since I was like 6, and I loved Disney movies growing up, and I said I want to do that. I don't know what that is, but I want to do that. There's got to be someone who makes this, and for some reason, a lot of people, it takes people a while to realize that there are actual live people who have to make these films and these shows. And I was like, forget all the other paths. This is the one for me. And there were periods of time where I was a preteen, I was not drawing as much or whatever, but ultimately it always was art that was a passion of mine. And um, so yeah, it's something that I am so happy that I chose because I have so much fun with it. Find that I just find a lot of happiness in it, and that's the most important thing to me. When I was growing up, I noticed that there were a lot of people who had careers that they weren't particularly passionate about, and I did not want that to be me. Even on the tough days of art, because there are plenty of those, I still find my way back here, and yeah, I can't break away from it.
Well, I mean, you get to make your own heroes, man, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's the best. I can't think of anything else I would want to do.
And just walk us through. You're playing with the hue and the saturation here off the colors you've already made. So
Mhm.
that's another thing for people to think about. Is that color is relatively easy to adjust once you've got it digitally. Where if you were in traditional methods, you'd be, all right, do it again.
Right, right. It's really helpful to do things like that, and the reason for it is because, as I mentioned, color is relative, and there are some times where it doesn't match properly. Like even this, I could probably change up. I'm not totally convinced on this little flap yet, but one thing that I also really like to do is I get a color, like let's say a purple or something, and make it pretty light and desaturated. And I'll fill the entire thing with it, the entire image, and I'll put it on a slight overlay so everything kind of has that like that glaze of this purple. And it's incredibly subtle. I don't even think you could see it on the screen, but I can see it. And I know that now it's starting to match all the colors because now they have something in common. So things like that I think are really
Right. A lot of text designers do that. If you've got a big blue graphic, your black text actually has about 3, maybe 5% of that color in the black, so
Mhm.
that it's not pure black tone. It's actually got a slight tone to it.
Right, exactly. So yeah, that's basically how I would design a character. And if this were approved, let's say, then I would take this to the next level and just do really clean lines and get it to the point where it looks closer to this. But I think the overall feel of the character is pretty close to what I envisioned. And so if I were to put this to the side and do a full line up here, let's see, put this, okay, this is another thing. Probably want to name your layers because I didn't do that and now I'm paying for it. Let's see. There we go.
You mean you don't just layer final for real final, client approved, final dot today dot final?
I typically number them actually because of that specific reason, because I got lost. I was like, I don't know because I know version 7 is going to be later than version 5. So I like doing stuff like that. But yeah, so just to reiterate the process again, we started with, well, first off, I should probably say this, started with the mood board and then figured out what I wanted to do, took it to the thumbnails, which I did over here. And as you could see, very lightly, there's still the nude figure version underneath. And I just sketched on top of it. Each of these took like 2 minutes. I don't think I mentioned that before, but it's meant to be super quick. It's not meant to be, brain surgery or anything. And then everything else just came like this. Took that thumbnail sketch, blew it up over him, sketched it real rough, and then cleaned up the lines a little bit and put some color on top and just plopped it in.
It's painful how easily you made that look, but I think everybody who sees this can see, okay, there is a method to this madness. This is not about, you're not drawing that final render because it's not going to exist. It cannot happen that way. You do have to have your fundamentals. You have to start with your anatomy. You have to start with your lines and your sketch. And most importantly, as you mentioned, your mood board, which really told us that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the ingredients have to come together before you make the final product.
Any last tips you want to give us?
Fall in love with what you're doing. There's a lot of times where you might get a prompt or even a character of your own project that you're working on that you don't particularly like or that you have a hard time finding a way to enjoy. And I would say whatever you can do, make it enjoyable. Your job as a concept artist, as a creator, is to make it exciting and make people want to go see this character in action, whether it's a movie or a game or whatever. So don't be afraid to add personal touches, add your opinion to it. Obviously go with the prompt. You don't want to, completely destroy the design, but definitely try and find as much ways to have fun with it as possible.
Excellent advice. And that's with Jordan McCracken-Foster here on the panel. And where can we find some of your artwork? Can you give us a website or your ArtStation page?
Yeah, so at artstation.com/Joe McFo, that's JOMCFO. And then on Instagram, it's also Joe McFo, but it's JO.MC.FO.
Okay, awesome. Jordan, thank you so very much. And I mean, again, you made this look easy, which is just awesome, dude.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching.